uh, agreeing to do an interview for the Veterans History Project. So let's begin by learning a little bit about Rudy Cusson.
Well, let's see. I was born in a small town of Moosup, Connecticut, which is almost near the Rhode Island border, near Norwich, Connecticut. And the name Moosup was derived by the Pilgrims almost, probably at that time. They were hunting a moose and they met some Indians, and the Indian says, "Moose up," and that's where they got the name Moosup. I didn't either. I was just told that. I don't know how true it is. But anyway, I lived there and I attended school in that town, a small Catholic school called All Hallows School, then on to high school in Plainfield, Connecticut, where I participated in baseball, basketball, and soccer. I never excelled in either one of them, but I enjoyed playing. An old friend of mine at that time was Walt Dropo, that played first base for the Boston Red Sox, and we were good friends and we were neighbors. I knew him quite well. We'd go to school together every day. And my mother was a housewife. My father was a carpenter and worked in town at the Aldrich plant. And, well, after high school, I'll go.
Brothers and sisters?
Oh, I have a brother Jerry, and my sister Lorraine, both passed away now. And, of course, my parents are gone. And then after high school, I had a little incident in high school that might be interesting to some people. My friend Al Molen, and you'll hear more of him later on, in front of the high school was a railroad track. And on that railroad track, freight trains used to come by. And one stopped one day, and, we decided to stop. Let's jump on that train and see where it goes. Well, we got on the train, on this freight train, and we went all the way to Providence, Rhode Island before it stopped. Now, we didn't have any money I can remember we had a nickel between both of us. We bought a package of gum, and that was the extent of our eating all that day. And we hitchhiked and walked all the way from Providence to Moosup. We got home around 2 o'clock in the morning. The sheriff's department was out looking for us. The Boy Scouts were out looking for us, but we finally made it. And we were safe and sound, but never do that again. Then after high school, I decided to join the Navy. And
you got to tell us about Fort Adams, right?
I'm sorry. While in high school, Al Molen and I went to Fort Adams. That is that's in Newport, Rhode Island, and it was called at the time CMTC, which meant Citizens Military Training Corps. And if you attended that course for 4 years during the summer, during your school vacation, and you would inherit a commission in the Army. Well, I went 1 year with Al, and we enjoyed it very much, and it looked a little bit like this here, if that shows anything.
Okay.
And
over just a little. Perfect.
And that's where we stayed, in these tents. And this lasted during the school vacation. But there was a fallacy there, because I told them I was 17. You had to be 17, but I was only 16. So after that, I decided not to go back. And that was the extent of that. And here we are at Fort Adams with, again, my same friend that we went to Providence with, Al Molen. And there we are. I'm almost 6 feet tall here and 135 pounds. But that's the way it was back in those days. I'm no longer 135 pounds.
Excellent. Now, didn't you have an episode with tear gas there?
Oh yes. While there, we were introduced to guns, the rifles. We got to shoot rifles, and had a taste of tear gas. They brought us in this building with a mask on and turned the tear gas on in the building and told us to take the masks off. Well, fortunately, the door to the outside was open, and there was a fast exit from that room after you get a taste of that tear gas. And I can see how the police have a big advantage when they use it. But anyway, that was about the extent of my time in Fort Adams. And back to school, graduated, and decided to join the Navy. And in the Navy, I was assigned to Newport, Rhode Island, boot camp, which was not too far from Fort Adams, where I had been before. And after boot camp, which was very interesting, I was assigned to Jacksonville, Florida. And there I went to school in aviation as an aviation mechanic. Graduated. Back in those days, the war was still on. The war hadn't started yet. And there was race problems back then, just like you all heard about. That's when the blacks had to sit in the back of the bus, and the toilets were for the blacks and then for the whites. And that's the era I was down there in Jacksonville. After graduating, I was assigned to, we had a class song. If I had a better voice, I'd sing it to you, but I won't sing it now. Down where the St. John's flow north to the sea. That's it. That's enough. And then I was assigned to Norfolk, Virginia, where I boarded the USS Wasp. That's CV-7, which was an aircraft carrier. And that is an aircraft carrier that carried about 2,000 men. And here's a picture of it after it was commissioned and when I boarded it. This is what it looked like. I have different pictures of it. You will see a little later. And let's see, from Washington, from Norfolk, Virginia, we went on several cruises. We went down up to Alaska. And the Japanese were pretty well situated there. And we came back down and went to the Caribbean and the Nassau. And then we're back to Norfolk, Virginia. Now we got received our orders to proceed to Russia to escort cargo ships. At the time, we were escorting the cargo ships. We had a few destroyers with us also. On that trip, on the battleship, the USS Washington, we had an admiral that was washed overboard. And during a storm, we sent our SBDs out looking for them and for him, and couldn't find him. But later on, as we were leaving the area, his body was sighted, but due to the weather, we could not retrieve it. Well, we escorted these cargo ships onto Russia. We never anchored there. From there, we went to Scapa Flow, Scotland, which is a natural water harbor in Scapa Flow, where all the ships anchored there. Was ideal for anchoring ships, and that's where we stayed for a few weeks, and then on to Glasgow, Scotland. We went up the River Clyde, and on the way up the river, people from the factories all stopped and hailed us and waved to us because we were the first military ship or naval ship in Glasgow, and for World War II. And we pulled up the river. We pulled up to Prince George's Pier, where we tied the carrier to the pier, the docks. All our planes, but except a few, had landed in Scotland at their airport. The reason we were there was to load up 47 Spitfires. A Spitfire is a fighter airplane that the British had back at the beginning of World War II. It was a high-speed fighter, very excellent airplane. We loaded 47 of them. They were loaded off the dock with a crane. Each plane was loaded individually, and here's a picture of one of the Spitfires being loaded. And
down just a little over toward there. There you go.
Here's a picture of the Spitfire being loaded onto the carrier. There was 47 of them, if I recall correctly. And after they were loaded, we went through the Straits of Gibraltar at pre-dawn, and it was kind of scary there because Spain was not involved, but there was a lot of German spies, for lack of a better word, that were watching for anything of this sort. But we managed to get through there without being caught or reported. And we headed for Malta, where we were bringing these Spitfires. And here's the Spitfire here taking off the carrier onto Malta to try to stop the German and the Italian fighters from strafing the island itself. And Churchill, Winston Churchill, he was the Prime Minister of England. He requested this from us, from the Americans, which we did. And on the way back, well, first of all, on that first trip, just quickly, we had one Spitfire went into the drink, and another one lost his fuel tank. And without his fuel tank, he couldn't make it to Malta. So captain gave him a choice, either to ditch the airplane and we'd pick him up with a destroyer, could land in Africa where the Nazis and the Germans were, or he could land in France where the Nazis and Germans were, or try to land aboard the carrier. Well, keep in mind that a Spitfire pilot never even saw an aircraft carrier, never mind was trained to land on one. And he made a pass. He didn't have a tail hook like our carrier planes had. So we brought all the barriers and the restraining wires down and left the ship wide open just for him. They went on a high speed facing into the wind. And he made a first pass, and he decided that he changed his mind for a moment, and he thought about it. And he made another pass, and he did. He landed about, I can't recall exactly where he landed, but he bounced very highly and then landed again amidships, put on his brakes, and skidded sideways all the way within 15 feet of going over the bow of the carrier. And it was quite an exciting moment. The captain came down and pinned the U.S. Navy wings onto his chest and shook his hand. And we let all the rest of the planes take off and went back. But we found out that the Nazis, the Germans, and the Italians had too many fighters, and they were expecting these planes. They found out in some fashion, which made the trip very unsuccessful. So on the way back, Prime Minister Churchill got a hold of our president, Roosevelt, and asked him if we would resume the same trip again. And here we go, back up the River Clyde and King George's Pier, and loaded another bunch of Spitfires. And Roosevelt agreed it would be okay. So we went back to Malta again, but this was a successful trip, and later on we were awarded the ship was awarded a medal, and it was very, we were quite proud of what we had done, because Churchill sent a note to President Roosevelt saying, who was the one that said that a wasp cannot sting twice? That was Churchill said that. So now we're out in the open ocean and back towards Norfolk. We had repairs done, and time went by, and we did a lot of training missions. We flew a lot of planes off the carrier, training outside of Norfolk, and now we got our orders to head for the South Pacific. Went down through the Panama Canal and up to San Diego. Went to the dry dock for about a week. Got retrofitted because we had to flame cut the sponsons. Sponsons are units where the 5-inch guns are mounted, and we couldn't get through the canal because it was too wide, and they had to cut the sponsons off with torches. And we passed through. That's how wide we were in relative to the canal. Yeah, we had to cut the sponsons off, and then that's why we went into dry dock in San Diego to have them replaced. Then we went into Hawaii, which was very interesting. I had a flight in Hawaii, and with some of four of our other pilots, our regular pilots. This has nothing to do with. This is just an incident we had. We took off. We went to Fort Island, the airport. Excuse me if I don't get these words right, but we got on 4 of these trainer planes that called SNJs. I think the Army or the Air Force calls them T6s. We call them in the Navy SNJs. And we went in a tight formation, and these pilots were all very young. You know, they were in their low 20s, not much older than I was. And we were in very tight formation, and they were hot rodding it, so to speak, with these trainer planes, because they were accustomed to fighter planes, and they were fooling around more than anything else. And they were trying to see how close they could come to each other. And we were close. All of a sudden, our wingtips hit, and the aileron flipped over, and he couldn't. The plane went over on its side like this, and he couldn't bring it back. And he said, "Hey, Rudy, I think you're going to have to bail out because I can't bring it back. I just can't." And so I took the harness off, and I stood up in the cockpit, and I put one foot on the seat to get out to jump. And I looked down, and all it was a jungle. And I said, "Oh my God!" I think my heart stopped. I said, "They'll never find me down there." But I was just about ready to jump, and all of a sudden the plane flipped back over and it sat me down in the seat. The aileron broke loose, and we made an emergency landing at Maui. And another plane came over and picked us up. But that was just a little incident we had. Now we headed later on. We headed for the South Pacific to the Solomon Islands. We stopped at Pango Pango first. I don't know why, probably refuel or whatever. And that was quite an interesting island. And then from there we went to Tangatabu and in the Solomons, and we were there for a while. Then we went to the Solomons at Guadalcanal, the Battle of Guadalcanal, and that was very interesting. I had the opportunity to be catapulted off the carrier on a SBD. Yeah. SBD-3, yes. Yeah. SBD-3 and a Douglas dive bomber. And I never got involved in any activity, but I had the opportunity to fly, and we did drop one. We dropped one bomb over Henderson Field in Guadalcanal, and that's about the extent of my activity in the airplanes. As far as anti-sub patrol, I did a few of those where we would leave the ship and fly out on a sector that we were assigned to, and then return. And if we did locate a submarine, an enemy submarine, and the pilot would get the latitude and longitude of its position and its heading, and he'd write it on a piece of paper and hand it to me, and I'd put it in a little sealed bag with and another bag attached to it, which was full of sand, and we had radio silence, and all we had was IFF, which is information friend or foe, IFF. That's the only code we had at the time, and then the only way we could get the message to the ship, was as to where the position of the sub was. You make a low pass over the flight deck, and I would drop the message on the flight deck. The reason the sandbag was there was so it would fall immediately, and if I missed the ship, which was almost impossible, it'd go over the side and it would sink. Then, we went down to New Guinea for a while, for some reason or other, I think to pick up some torpedoes. And on the way back, because I remember smoking cigarettes while we were straddling torpedoes, and while they were piled up on the beach. But anyway, we came back, and on the way back, a Japanese submarine decided they'd let us have it. They fired 4 torpedoes at us, and 2 of them hit midships on the starboard side. Well, that caused quite a commotion. We had a lot of aviation fuel on board. We had torpedoes, we had bombs, we had the fuel. I can't imagine how many gallons we had. And we had bombs. And they all started exploding and detonating and fire. And midships was the worst part of it. We lost all our communication. We lost our contacts, radio contacts. We had no communication whatsoever. We had no water to fight the fire or the explosions. And there was no other way but eventually Captain Sherman decided to, I guess he had a conference with someone else, made a decision to abandon ship. Well, the ship was listing severely towards the starboard side, and the oil was falling off the ship and was being ignited and burning alongside the ship. And some of the fellows made the mistake of going down on the lines, and this was amidships where all the fire was, and they couldn't get away, so they had no choice but to do that. The people on the stern on the rear of the ship were able to get off on life rafts, and they were able to go down the ladders. But from midships forward, we didn't have that availability. So they were dropping down on ropes, but there was fire down there, and they were dropping in the fire. And I was on the flight deck on the forward end. I went down towards that area and looked down. And if you look closely at this picture, you can see where there's smoke on the starboard side, and there's some lines there, and that's where they went down. And here's a picture of the...
Yeah, perfect.
That's a picture of it. And I'm on the flight deck. Let's see if I can point out. Sure. I'm on the flight deck up here. Wow. I'm away from the fire, but I can't get towards that direction. So I went to the edge of here, and I could see down here where these fellows were falling into the burning oil. Well, I decided I'm not going to do that. So I went to the port side, which was over here, and I took my sneakers off, and I ran across the flight deck, and I jumped over the flames, which was a 57-foot jump. Well, that's almost 6 stories high. It was pretty high. And I when I hit the water, I had my Mae West on, and I hadn't buckled it on the crotch, and it slipped right off over my head, and I descended, oh, I don't know how deep, but I found that I was running out of air, and I started trying to find myself back up to the surface where
That's good.
I get some air.
Yeah.
And then I realized I didn't have a life jacket. So I almost gave up there. I said, I'll never make it. And there it was. God was looking over me. There it was in a big swell in the ocean, this big swells. And it was sitting right on the bottom of one of these swells. And I put it on, and 3.5 hours later, I was picked up by the destroyer USS Duncan. And here's a picture of the Duncan.
Survivors, yeah.
And these are survivors that were picked up way before I was, because they were on life rafts and they were spotted immediately. I was not spotted. But as I pulled up alongside the Duncan, they extended a bosun ladder, which is a rope ladder with steps on it. And I reached for the first rung, and all of a sudden, the Duncan just took off, like didn't want me on board. And I lost the grip, and I was thrown in the wake of that destroyer, which made me very, very nauseous and kind of upset. But then they calmed down, and they came back and picked me up. The reason they left, they had made a contact with a submarine. And you may ask, why was there no sharks in that area, which is a shark-invested area? Well, they were dropping depth charges all this time, and the sharks didn't approve of that, so they stayed away from the area. We had no casualties from sharks. But the destroyer, Duncan, came back and picked me up. Then I was transferred to the Helena. Well, have I got that right? Yeah, the cruiser Helena. And was on board her for a while.
Didn't you come home for 30 days?
No, I'm not. I'm still on the Helena.
Okay.
And now they took us to New Caledonia and dropped us off there, and they brought the wounded there. There was a hospital there. They brought a lot of the wounded. And of course, at sea, we got rid of the bodies. On the Duncan that I was on, I can't recall, there was probably 10 bodies that we had the ceremonies for and send them out at sea. But then the wounded were left off at the hospital and oh boy, I just mentioned it and I forgot what it was. New Caledonia. And the island of New Caledonia was owned by the French. And they were taking care of the hospitals, and I was sent back to the States on a Dutch transport. And I learned a few words in Dutch, which was always pointed out to us, verboden te roken, which meant do not smoke. They didn't want us smoking on this. So we went back to the States all alone without any destroyers alongside of us to protect us. And we built a boxing ring. It took us, I don't know, 20 some days. And we built a boxing ring on there to keep us active. We did boxing bouts and things like that on the way back to San Diego. In San Diego, we didn't have any clothes but the dungarees we had on, the shoes that I was given, and a T-shirt. We didn't have any other clothes. But they did let us go ashore in these clothes. And I don't know if I should tell this, but one of the fellas says, "Boy, the first woman I come to, I'm going to bite her on the ass." So we're in this nightclub, and we're sitting there, and sitting on the round table, and this waitress comes over with our drinks. on a glass tray. She presented the glass tray. She's bending over like this and he reaches over and he bites her. And she screamed. And she took her glass tray and hit him right over the head and broke it. I don't know if I should be telling this story or not, and now the shore patrol came in and locked us all up. And we didn't have any identification. We had nothing. Why they ever let us out, I don't know. But then they gave us full uniforms and reinstated us to the Naval Air Station, and we went home for 30 days.
So you went home from the West Coast back here to Connecticut?
Back to Connecticut now my folks had moved to Bristol, Connecticut, which is where I went back to them, and we couldn't talk about the sinking of the ship. It was never mentioned. And I happened to be in a boys' club shooting pool with my brother-in-law one night during those 30 days, and it came over the radio that the USS Wasp had been sunk. And so I could talk about it then.
It was okay.
Yeah. And then, I don't know, after my 30 days, I was assigned to another aircraft carrier, the USS the USS Prince Williams. And that was a baby flat top. We didn't have many planes on there. I never flew again. And all my flight records were lost. Everything I had was lost on the Wasp. But started all over again on the Prince Williams. We went back down the South Pacific. Never saw any real action. We went to some of the islands, brought back the wounded Marines, and back to the States. And then I was transferred to Chicago. I attended school in Chicago for quite a while. 87th and Anthony, if anybody knows Chicago. And that's when the big time bands were there. The Trianon and the Aragon, the big dance halls were all name any of the big bands, and they all were there at that era. And we danced and had a lot of fun there in Chicago. I was there for several months, graduated from the school there, and then they sent me to Bremerton, Washington, where I was assigned to and commissioned another aircraft carrier called the Fetus Bay. And from there we went to, what was the island, where they raised the flag? Iwo Jima. Yeah. Went to Iwo Jima, picked up a bunch of Marines there, wounded Marines. Our hangar deck was full of cots with wounded Marines and brought them back to the States. And well, time went by. We went back down the South Pacific, but no real activity. Got a lot of suntans. We crossed the equator, I don't know how many times. We crossed the international. And you cross the equator, you become a shellback. You're a polywog in the Navy until you cross the equator. Once you cross the equator, you become a shellback. But then if you cross the equator and the international dateline on the same day, you're called a dragon. And that's what we did one day. Across the both, you're in Wednesday one day and all of a sudden it's Tuesday again. And your calendar gets changed. But anyway, we did that a few times. And it was, when you cross the equator, it's a big ceremony, a very big ceremony. There's King Neptune is dressed up as a king with a big beard, and he stands up there, and he's got a baby there. I can't recall all the names, but they have, I can recall one instance where big tow targets that we used to use in the planes. That's another thing I did. I forgot to mention it, but we used to take a tow target and fill it with garbage and pass all the polywogs through there and swat them on their rear as they're going through. And then they'd get on the elevator, we'd get on the flight deck, and they'd build a pool down on the bottom of the flight deck, and we'd toss them. No, first of all, we put them on like a barber's chair and shave some of their hair off. And if you had a mustache, you'd take half of it off. And then they'd tip them over and they'd fall into that pool. And then the King Neptune and shake hands with him, and now he was a shellback. But that was only a few of the ceremonies that happened there.
Wonderful.
And there's an actual book on this, on the ceremonies.
Yeah.
So now I'm back in the States. I was assigned to Memphis, Tennessee Naval Air Training Center in Memphis, Tennessee, waiting for my discharge.
Okay.
And
So it's 1945 now?
46.
6, okay.
Yeah, I was in the Navy for 6 years,
Okay.
complete 6 years, 41 to 47. I was in 47.
I'd like to ask you where you were and how you felt about the dropping of the atomic bomb.
I was out at sea, and
Okay.
and
How did that,
it didn't.
were you, it was necessary?
Well, yeah, we felt it was necessary. We felt it was necessary to get rid of these Japanese,
Yeah.
and they're sinking our ships one after the other, and,
Wow, the invasion.
and they, yeah,
Big,
yeah,
big
yeah.
loss of life.
yeah. But that was part of the war, and of course all the military people were for it. I'm sure there was a lot of people against it after, especially after it happened, but because a lot of civilians died there. And any other questions?
No, now you're back.
Oh, by the way, I'm back in Memphis, and I had a little incident that we had in Memphis. I was called to Johnston City, Tennessee. I was shooting pool one night, and somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, "The executive officer wants to see you." I thought, why would an executive officer want to see me? I'm waiting for discharge. So I went over there, I met with him. He says, "I'm sending you to Johnston City, Tennessee to pick up a prisoner." I says, "I can't go. I'm getting married 3 days after I get home. It's all set up, and I can't go." I said, "Well, you've got your orders that you're going." So they put a shore patrol badge on me, gave me my 45, and gave me a seaman to come with me. We got on a train, went to Johnston City, picked up this prisoner, and he was in talk about cells of the old days. Had to walk downstairs, and they fed him through the bottom of the door. That's how old it was. And I picked up this young man who had gone AWOL, put the handcuffs on him and walked him through town onto the train. On the train, you cannot handcuff a person. You can't handcuff a prisoner. So I'd sit him on the right side of the seat. I'd take my gun and put it on the left side, and my seaman sat in a seat across. And all of a sudden, I had a nice conversation with him, and he was anxious to get back to the Navy, and because the way he was treated. The train stopped. I had fallen asleep. And who came on board but a shore patrol officer and 4 shore patrol people. He said, wake up, the shore patrol. The prisoner woke me up. The shore patrol is here. But they weren't looking for me. They were just boarding the train. And they had nothing to do with me. But it was nice of him to wake me up. So we got into Memphis, and I guess they were waiting for us at the train station. They took over the prisoner. So everything went on according to schedule, fortunately. Then I got discharged and flew in at DC-3 from Memphis, Tennessee to Brainerd Field. At that time, Brainerd Field was accepting airliners. And went home and married this lovely girl that I had met. Her name was Shirley Moran, and we got married and went on a honeymoon, had a very nice life, had 2 beautiful daughters, and as I sit here, I have one of them sitting right here with me right now. The other one passed away, and my wife passed away, and I guess that's the extent of my military service. But from there on, I worked for a company that did work for Pratt & Whitney.
And you maintained flying. We talked about your flying career.
Oh yes, I've been. I was no sooner out of the service. As a matter of fact, I was interested in flying all my life. I had my first flight in Vermont in a seaplane. My dad took me up in a seaplane. Well, he wasn't flying it, but he took me up as a passenger. and a small four-seater seaplane. That was my first flight. My dad took me up on it and fell in love with it. I was probably, 10 years old, probably. And when I got out of the Navy, I was involved in flying all the time. And when I got out of the Navy, I wanted to start flying again. And I've been flying all my life. I just sold my last airplane a few months ago to a gentleman out in Oregon. I sold it so I have some money to buy this house I'm living in now.
How about that? You told me about the first airplane you bought that you brought like a used car.
Well, the first airplane I bought was a fabric-covered airplane, and right now I can't think of the name of it. Unfortunately, it was a two-seater. It was an airplane that I had trained in, and there was a big hole in the side of the fabric. I took duct tape and taped over it, and I took off with it and flew over what is now Tunxus Community College on Route 6 in Farmington. At that time, it was a farm with a field in the back with a large parking lot situated, and I flew over the wires on Route 6 and landed in that pasture and taxied across Route 177, this highway called Unionville Avenue, up to my front yard and parked in front of my picture window in my front yard. If you drive by there at any time, the yellow house that you see across the street from the parking lot is my house that I built. It took me a year to build it. I built that house, and I parked a plane there. And oh, by the way, it was in the fall, and all the leaves had fallen from the maple trees onto my lawn. My lawn was quite large; it was 200 feet wide. And I turned the plane around and started it up and blew all the leaves off the field across the highway onto the open field. But that's how I raked the lawn that year. Before that, the girls used to have to rake it. She's shaking her head over there right now. And then I took the wings off and I rebuilt the whole airplane. It took me a year to rebuild it. Put it back. Then I couldn't fly it back. I took it back to the airport and put wings on a truck and the fuselage on a truck. No, I towed the airplane back of my car without the wings and brought it to Plainville Airport, assembled the wings on it, and it was in wintertime. There was snow on the ground, and I took off with it for my test flight, flew over the airport for about an hour or less. I stayed over the airport all the time. I wasn't sure what was going to happen because I did work on the engine also. But everything went fine. I landed there. Eventually, I sold it. And I owned 12 different airplanes during my lifetime. I flew all over through Mexico. I landed in Cozumel, flew over, flew to Haiti and Dominican Republic, St. Kitts, San Juan, Puerto Rico, all over the Bahama Islands. I flew over to Nova Scotia, to British Columbia. So I've been around quite a bit in private airplanes, more so in private airplanes. But then I was assigned, my company sent me to Florida, and I've been in Florida for 30 years. And my daughter's trying to tell me something.
Civil Air Patrol.
Oh yeah, I flew. Well, I didn't only fly I flew for the Civil Air Patrol. I even flew for the Coast Guard Auxiliary down in Florida. I flew for both of them. We used to patrol a lot, and which was very interesting. I don't know if you want to hear all this, but I was assigned on one mission where a boat had been spotted, and they were getting rid of their bales of marijuana. And I was assigned to go there, and report when I arrived, and I flew over the top, and they were still dumping their bales of, and I flew pretty high because I didn't know if they were going to start shooting at me, but obviously they didn't have any guns. They weren't shooting at me. And I kept reporting to the Coast Guard as to the procedure and their position. I was able to give them the longitudes as to where we were, and a cutter was on its way out. And then they got rid of all their marijuana, and they headed for Fort Pierce in that direction. And of course, I had to fly as slow as possible and circle over the top of them and follow them in there. And when they pulled into the towards the piers, that's Fort Pierce, they noticed, and I was reporting their heading all the time. The Coast Guard was all waiting on the docks with rifles. So they turned around and went out back to sea, and I followed them out to sea, and they decided, well, they're not going to get away from me, and I kept reporting their positions. So they turned around and gave themselves up to the Coast Guard. That was one mission. Then another mission was near Miami. I was following two high-speed boats, and they had drugs on board, according, and I was trying to follow them. They were in high speed, so I could go a pretty good speed with my plane. But I didn't know. I stayed in my distance. I didn't know if they would start shooting at me or not. But then I was following both of them, and then I guess they realized that, and they parted ways. And so I picked the one on the left. I followed him. I don't know where the one on the right went. I followed him right into Miami, and the shore patrol the Coast Guard was waiting for him there. So that was my experiences between the
Important duty, yeah.
the Coast Guard and the patrol, Civil Air Patrol.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Oh, anything else? I don't.
How about veterans groups now?
Well, I just recently joined the VFW Avon VFW group, and I've only been with them for a few months. Matter of fact, they have no meetings, official meetings in the summertime, so we meet at Friendly's every morning, every Thursday morning at 10 o'clock, and we have coffee, and the commander comes and reports any activity, and we have a nice BS section there.
Wonderful.
And it's every Thursday morning. We just have coffee. Some of them have breakfast.
Good bunch of guys.
Yeah, I think it's next month, I think it's next month they're going to start the official meetings at their. I've never been there. It's in Avon somewhere.
Yeah, they have a post.
Yeah. Italian club in Avon.
That's wonderful. Yeah, great bunch of guys.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Have a lot of, I haven't been, but
yeah. I told them that you may come there.
Well, I talked to some of the veterans there.
Did you? Yeah.
And I think you're going to have some interesting conversations. So.
Yeah. So.
You want to hold that up once more? The name.
The name of what?
This one right here.
Oh, this one.
This. Yeah. Hold it up.
This. Oh.
Yeah. And a little more. Down a little, Rudy. Over just a little. A little more. Up a little. Okay. So, I want to thank Rudy Cusson for his interview for the Veterans History Project. It's been a privilege and an honor to talk with you and hear your exciting time in the service, sitting here with your daughter Lee. And with that, I want to thank you, and the Veterans History Project thanks you.
Should I say anything?
No, thank you, Rudy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Should I make an excuse of some kind?
It's just a little information that we
Neglected.
Interesting story. So you have one more story for us, Rudy.
Okay. Is it ready?
Yes.
It's ready?
You're rolling.
Oh, one more story that I'd like to mention. My dad, which was not upset when I joined the Navy, but he was concerned. And he wanted to know where I would be throughout my 6-year tenure. And so he he took he obtained a map of the world and pasted it up on the kitchen wall. It was quite a large map. My mother couldn't figure out what he was up to. So what he did, well, the way we arranged it, that every country would have an alphabet next to it. We wrote all the countries we could think of and put an alphabet next to it. Like, well, let's say, for instance, Australia could be A, or could be B, could be C, could be anything we assigned to it. And when I wrote letters, as soon as I was out at sea, I started writing letters. And of course, they were severely censored. Messages were cut out or completely destroyed because we couldn't mention anything about where we were. So the agreement I had with my dad was, your middle initial now is O. That's your real middle initial. But if I write Joseph, his first name was Joseph, if I write Joseph P. Cusson, well, you look up P on your calendar and you'll know where the letter was sent from. And he'd look at the map and he'd look for P, what P was, and if it happened to be Australia, that's where we were. If it happened to be in Iceland, that's where we were. And that was throughout the entire world. And I covered, if we had gone through the Suez Canal and continued on to Guadalcanal or to the United States, that would have been circumference around the world. So he knew exactly where we were. Not exactly, because our letters took a long time sometimes to get home. Right. But he tracked me all the time.
But what a unique code.
Yeah,
you and your dad.
That was our code.
Identify your location.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
We decided that before I left.
Yeah.
I thought I'd mention that. Excellent. I don't know if it's worth it.
Excellent. Thank you, Rudy.